In domestic politics today, there's been a major focus on defence and national security from both the government and the opposition. The Prime Minister and Defence Minister announced a 30% expansion in Defence Force personnel numbers over the next 2 decades. So it's necessary, it's wise, but like most of our defence promises, it's off in the never-never. Here's the PM.
It's a significant recognition by our government, which has always been clear-eyed about the threats and the environment that we face as a country, as a liberal democracy in the Indo-Pacific. Today I'm announcing that we will boost our defence forces by some 18,500, which will take our defence forces to 80,000 in number.
Now, this came as the opposition leader made another major speech. Yesterday, he claimed to be a conservative on economic management. Today, he claimed to be a conservative on defence and security.
For Labor, national security is above partisan politics, and fundamental to our national security is our national resilience.
Well, not so far above partisan politics that Anthony Albanese didn't attack the government for being all announcement and no delivery on defence. The PM had a crack back about how Labor dropped the ball on defence procurement when last it was in office. But just as the big soft underbelly of Albanese's economic plan yesterday was his pledge on renewable energy, so too was climate policy a huge weakness in his defence and security plan outlined today. I mean, he included climate change as a priority in security and defence.
Too many Australians have first-hand knowledge of the brutality of bushfires, drought and flood. Climate change is here now. Instead of playing a positive role in the global effort to combat climate change, the truth is that Australia is seen as one of the recalcitrant nations holding action back. This undermines our status and our presence in the region.
Yeah, bag Australia the laggard. That'll really help us in international standing. We hear it all the time, don't we? Forget our 20% cuts in emissions, forget meeting our emissions reductions pledges and now committing to a net zero by 2050, a crazy brave promise, I reckon. But whatever we do, whatever we promise, Labor and the Greens still want more. Do they never stop to realise that it's the mad rush to renewables over the past 2 decades that pushed up electricity prices, increased the pressure on manufacturing, saw more businesses close or shift their operations offshore, and therefore strengthened, relatively, the Chinese economy at the same time? Do they not see how doing more of the same is only going to continue to weaken our energy security here, undermine our national self-reliance, weaken our manufacturing base, make us more vulnerable, and all the while, of course, make China stronger by comparison because it burns our coal, increases its emissions, and expands its manufacturing? If you doubt this equation, just look at Europe right now. Just look at how vulnerable Germany is, suddenly realising that Russia can't be this benign supplier of energy. And now Germany having to look at extending the life of its coal-fired and nuclear power plants. If Australia wants to be energy-rich, secure, independent and economically strong, but doesn't want carbon dioxide emissions, then we have to embrace nuclear energy. That much is obvious. It's the only answer. But don't expect any sense in this debate anytime soon. The ridiculous claim that the floods and fires that have always bedevilled this continent can now be blamed on climate change, even though we've had worse fires, deeper droughts and heavier rainfall, well, they're going to continue until the election. And the unbelievably silly claim that a switch to Labor and the Greens will change this, that what Australia does can eradicate natural disasters or somehow make them less severe, this is the nonsense you'll hear repeated in much of the media and especially on the taxpayer-funded media. And sadly, the Prime Minister is bending to their narrative.
And with so many Australians feeling the harshest effects of global warming, the PM's even issuing concessions.
Australia is becoming a harder country to live in because of these natural disasters.
This from a guy who once wielded a lump of coal in Parliament. Climate is not the only thing changing.
Now, apart from being wrong, with so many weather records, of course, predating the modern era, this is just so insulting to our forebears, isn't it? Australia is tougher to live in now. Who are we trying to kid? What a horrible way to dismiss those who battled floods, droughts and fires in the decades and centuries past. Now, this is not to downplay all the horrors of our current floods or recent disasters. They've been terrible and deadly. We know that. But isn't it typical of the modern trend, the self-centred, selfie-taking and mollycoddled generations of today pretending that we've got it worse than those who went before us, those who went through war and famine and flood and fire? This debate is heading in a terrible direction where facts don't seem to matter. We can expect protesters to harangue the Prime Minister wherever he goes up until election day. They'll be encouraged by Labor, the Greens and the media to try to fuel their narrative of a leader and a climate under siege. They don't want the election to be about the pandemic response or economic management or national security, because if it is, the coalition might win. So they'll try to make it about a climate crisis and they'll personalise it every day against Scott Morrison. That's why he's trying to throw them a bone. But there's nothing he can do or say that will weaken their attack. It's all they've got, and he ought to realise that. And the funniest thing about all of this is that they run the argument that if you elect Labor and the Greens, if you elect Anthony Albanese and Adam Bandt, then it'll all be fine. The soaking rains will come in winter, but not so much as to flood our towns. Droughts will be a thing of the past, and even bushfires, well, they won't burn so severely. Utopia will be upon us. The very ecology of this continent will be transformed. A land of droughts and flooding rains will become a land of milk and honey. This is Twitter-level politics. If people are silly enough to buy that, then we are all doomed, regardless of the weather.